I still remember the echo of his voice that night, sharp like broken glass cutting through the silence of our home. "If you step out of this house, don't come back!" Those words weren't just words. They were a sentence, a curse, a scar that divided my life into two parts: the girl who once had a father, and the woman who walked away carrying nothing but a suitcase and a heart too heavy to bear. I was 26 years old enough to be considered an adult, yet still young enough to crave the tenderness of family, the reassurance that I had a place to return to whenever the world outside felt too harsh. That night, standing in the doorway of the house where I had grown up, clutching my worn-out suitcase, I felt like a child who had suddenly been thrown into the cold night with no blanket to protect her. The walls that once held my laughter now seemed to close in on me, suffocating me with their silence. My mother stood in the kitchen, silent, her eyes glued to the floor. She didn't dare speak, or maybe she didn't want to. Maybe she agreed with him. That thought still haunts me to this day. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat, but tears betrayed me, spilling freely down my cheeks. I whispered, almost to myself, "I don't want that either." My voice was weak, trembling, and I knew he didn't care to hear it. His back was already turned, his figure disappearing into the shadows of the living room, where the light barely reached. That was the last image I had of him, a man who once carried me on his shoulders, now too proud, too angry, or maybe too broken himself, to look at me one last time. I had always been the dutiful daughter, the one who never talked back, who studied hard, who sacrificed my own dreams to keep the peace at home. But none of that mattered. None of the nights I stayed awake tutoring my younger brother so he could pass his exams. None of the weekends I skipped outings with friends just to help my mother with chores. None of the paychecks I secretly slipped into the family expenses mattered when the storm finally came. The fight starts small, as most fights do. My father had always had a temper, quick to flare like gasoline near an open flame. That night it was about money again. Always money. My brother had gotten into debt again. Gambling, lies, excuses. My father demanded I help pay it off, like I always did, but I couldn't. I had just scraped enough together to put down a deposit on a small apartment. My first step towards independence. My first attempt at carving out a life of my own. I told him no. The word feels foreign on my tongue, heavy and dangerous. His eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched, and I knew in that instant I had crossed a line I could never uncross.
"This family raised you? Now you dare turn your back?"
He spat, his voice filled with venom. My mother flinched but stayed silent. My brother stood at the corner, eyes shifting nervously, but he didn't say either. He didn't defend me. He never did. I realized then that I had been nothing but a safety net for everyone else's mistakes, a bank, a servant, a daughter only when it was convenient for them. I felt anger rising inside me, hot and unstoppable. For the first time, I spoke back. I can't carry all his mistakes anymore. I have my own life. The room froze. My father's face turned red, his hands trembling. And then came the words that shattered me. "If you leave this house, don't come back." It wasn't just a threat, it was declared. He wanted me gone. He chose my brother over me. He chose silence over understanding, and so, with shaking hands, I grabbed my suitcase, the one I had packed weeks before in secret, just in case this day ever came. I had always known, deep down, that love in our house was conditional, that my place there was fragile, hanging by a thread. That night, the thread snapped. The street outside was cold, the kind of damp cold that seeps into your bones. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the gate I had closed behind me. My heart pounded in my chest. Each beat reminded me I was alone now. A taxi passed by, and I waved it down, forcing myself not to look back. If I looked back, I would crumble. If I looked back, I would run inside, beg for forgiveness, promise to give up everything again just to be allowed to stay. But I didn't. I clenched my teeth, wiped my tears, and told myself, This is not the end. This is the beginning.
Yet beginnings are never as hopeful as they sound.
The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I moved into that tiny apartment with peeling paint and a leaky faucet, but it was mine. For the first time, I woke up in a space where no one shouted at me. No one demanded I fix their mess. No one questioned my worth. But freedom has its price. At night, the silence was deafening. I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if my father thought of me at all, wondering if my mother missed me, if she regretted not speaking up, wondering if my brother even took care that I had walked away. There were moments I hated myself for leaving. Moments I thought maybe I had been selfish. But then I would remember the look on my father's face, the coldness in his voice, and I knew it wasn't me who failed. It was them. I tried to rebuild my life piece by piece. I worked harder at my job, saved every penny, and surrounded myself with people who saw me as more than just a means to an end. Yet no matter how far I tried to run, the wounds of that night followed me like shadows. They whisper in my ear whenever I laugh too loudly, reminding me that happiness was fleeting. They appeared in my dreams, where I would hear his voice again, pushing me out of the house, telling me I didn't belong. It wasn't until months later that the truth began to unravel, and I realized that betrayed runs deeper than words. One evening, as I was leaving work, I bumped into an old neighbor from my childhood street. She looked at me with surprise, then pity. "Aren't you going home to see your mother?" she asked gently. My chest tightened. I hadn't been back, not once. "Your father gets drunk a lot these days," she continued. "I heard he took money from the house to pay off your younger brother's debt. Poor mother, she cries every day." The world tilted under my feet. So it was true. My father hadn't just chosen my brother over me. He had sacrificed everything for him. My mother was suffering silently, trapped in the chaos I had tried to escape. The anger I had buried deep inside roared back to life. I wanted revenge. I wanted them to feel the weight of the pain they had put on me. I wanted my father to regret every word he had spat that night. But revenge is never simple. It sees into your soul, disguising itself as justice, while slowly eating away at the fragments of your heart that still remember love. I didn't know then how far I would go, or how much it would cost me. All I knew was that the story wasn't over. Not yet. I walked home that night with my fists clenched, my mind racing. For years I had been the silent daughter, the obedient one, the peacemaker. But now, I was someone else. Someone who would no longer be silent, who would no longer carry the sins of others on her shoulders. If my father thought I would disappear quietly, he was wrong, because I was coming back. Not as the daughter they once knew, but as the reckoning they never expected. The night I learned the truth from that old neighbor, something inside me shifted. It was like a dormant flame suddenly sparked, filling every corner of my chest with heat. For so long I had convinced myself that leaving was the end of my pain. But hearing how my father continued to enable my brother's destructive habits, how my mother was left to cry in silence, reminded me that I was still entangled in the web of this family's betrayal. I had walked away with a suitcase, yes, but I had carried the weight of their sins with me. And that weight had become unbearable. I began digging. At first, I only wanted to know. Curiosity, I told myself. If my father had risked everything for my brother, I needed to understand why. But as the pieces came together, the need for understanding turned into something darker. Vengeance seeped into my veins like poison. I called a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years, someone who still lived near my parents. She was hesitant at first, but when I told her I needed to know what was happening in that house, her words poured out like a dam breaking. "You can't imagine it," she whispered, lowering her voice as if my father could somehow hear her. My father used the house title deed as collateral to pay off my brother's debt. Now the bank has warned me. My mother has been fainting for the past few days. My knees went weak. The image of my mother collapsing, holding her chest while my father drank himself senselessly, carved a wound into me deeper than the night I was cast out. My brother, he had done this again and again, and somehow still had their protection. And I had been the one sent away, the one blamed, the one abandoned. In that moment, I realized what I had always known but never dared admit. Love in my family was not built on truth or loyalty. It was built on favoritism, on blindness, on sacrifices demanded from the wrong people. My father would burn the entire house to the ground if it meant shielding my brother from consequence. And suddenly, I knew what I had to do. At first, the plan formed slowly, carefully, like the cautious stitching of a wound. I started collecting evidence, receipts, whispers from relatives, documents I can get access to through connections at the bank. Every piece of paper told the same story. My father was drowning in debts of his own making, dragged down by my brother's greed. They had hidden it for years, patching up holes with whatever they could find, but now the cracks were too wide to seal. The house I had grown up in, the house my mother had spent her life protecting, was in danger, and so was she. I can still recall the first night I sat on the floor of my apartment, papers spread out around me like a storm. My hands trembled as I pieced together the puzzle, each fragment slicing through me like a blade. The betrayal was total. My father had told me to leave because I refused to keep feeding the fire he and my brother had lit. He had chosen them, but not because I was wrong, because I was inconvenient, because I refused to be their sacrifice anymore. That realizes both destroy me and set me free. I cried until my chest ached, until my voice was hoarse. Then, in the silence that followed, I made a vow. If they wanted to see how strong I could be without them, I would show them. I wouldn't just survive. I would expose the truth they tried to bury, and I will make them face the consequences of every choice they had made. It wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't even about the house. It was about justice, about reclaiming the part of me they had quieted for so long. The next step was confrontation. I didn't go back to the house immediately. Weeks passed as I gathered more strength, more proof. I wanted to walk in not as the weeping daughter who had left with trembling hands, but as someone they could no longer dismiss. I needed them to see me, not the version of me they had created, but the woman I had become. When the day finally came, I dressed with care. Not out of vanity, but out of purpose. My black blazer, pressed perfectly, my hair pulled back. No trace of weakness in my appearance. My suitcase was long gone. This time I carried only a folder, heavy with documents that would shatter the fragile walls of lies my father had built. As I approached the gate of my childhood home, my legs threatened to give way. The house looked smaller than I remembered, tired and worn, as though it too had aged under the weight of secrets. My mother opened the door, and when her eyes fell on me, I saw a flicker of something: hope, fear, regret. She whispered my name. Her voice broke. For a moment, I almost collapsed into her arms, forgetting why I had come. But then I remembered the nights she had stayed silent, the nights she had chosen fear over me, and I steadied myself. "I'm home," I said simply, stepping inside. My father was in the living room, slouched in his chair with a glass of liquor in hand. His eyes broadened when he saw me, then narrowed, hardening like stone. "Do you still have the face to return here?" His voice dripped with disdain. I didn't flinch. I set the folder down on the table, the sound sharp in the heavy silence. "I didn't come back to apologize," I said firmly. "I came back to show everyone the truth." The air thickened. My brother shifted uneasily in the corner, his eyes darting to the folder. He knew. He knew I had uncovered everything. One by one, I laid the papers out. Loan agreements, receipts, notices from the bank. My father's signature, my brother's debts. My mother gasped. Her hands flew to her mouth. My father's face drained of color, then flushed red with fury. "Don't you dare," he started, but I cut him off. "I dare not say anything. This is the truth, and everyone around me already knows it. Neighbors, relatives, everyone knows it. I don't need to make anything up. My mother's tears fell silently. My brother curses under his breath, blaming me, blaming everyone but himself. But I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of their anger. I wasn't afraid of their rejection. I had already survived it once. And now, I had nothing left to lose.
You told me to leave, I said, my voice steady though my heart raced.
You told me never to come back. But the truth doesn't care about your words. It finds its way back, no matter how much you try to bury it. And tonight, it's here.
My father's hand shook as he slammed his glass down, the liquid spilling across the table.
But his eyes betrayed him. Behind the fury there was fear. He knew the walls were crumbling. He knew the legacy he had tried to protect through lies and sacrifices was collapsing before his eyes. And in that moment, I realized revenge wasn't about shouting or destroying or even making them beg. Revenge was standing there, unbroken, while they faced the ruin they had created. Revenge was survived when they had expected me to fail. I gathered my papers, tucking them back into the folder. My voice softened, but my words cut deeper than any scream. I don't need this house anymore. I don't need anything from you anymore. I just want you to remember, you lost a daughter. And it's not my fault. I turned to leave, my mother calling after me, her sobs echoing through the hall. My father remained silent, his face buried in his hands. My brother shouted something I no longer cared to hear. As I stepped out of the house, I felt the air shift. The weight I had carried for years lifted, just slightly. Enough for me to breathe again, but freedom is never clean. Walking away didn't erase the scars. It didn't silence the voice that still haunts me in the dark. If you step out of this house, don't come back. It didn't erase the ache of knowing my mother chose silence, or the grief of realizing I had no family to lean on anymore. Yet for the first time, the pain didn't define me. It fuels me. It carved me into someone stronger, sharper, someone who could no longer be silent. I had walked out once as a broken daughter. This time, I walked out as a woman who had faced betrayal and survived. And I knew the story wasn't over. After that night, when I confronted them with the truth and walked out once more, I thought the chapter was finally closed. But I underestimated how betrayal lingers like smoke after a fire. It sees into everything, into every breath you take, until even the air feels poisoned. At work, I functioned like a machine. My colleagues praised me for being dedicated, for always showing up early and staying late. But they didn't know the truth. I worked like that to drown out the silence of my apartment, to silence the echo of my father's words, the cries of my mother, the sound of the glass slamming onto the table. I thought that by burying myself in deadlines and projects, I could escape the reality of being a daughter cast aside. But every time I saw a father walking with his child on the street, every time I saw a mother's hand resting protectively on her daughter's shoulder, something inside me cracked a little more. I told myself I was stronger, and in some ways I was. I had stood up to him, shown him the evidence, forced him to face the destruction he had created. But revenge, I discovered, doesn't bring peace. It brings emptiness. Because once the fire burns out, you are left with ashes. Weeks passed, then months. My cousin kept me updated about what was happening in the old house. The bank had finally taken action, sending officials to seize parts of the property. My father raged, blaming everyone but himself. My brother disappeared for days at a time, only to crawl back home with more excuses. And my mother, my poor mother, she shrank into a shadow of herself. Neighbors whispered about how she looked 10 years older in just a few months, how she never lifted her eyes when she went to the market. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to say it was her fault for staying silent, for never protecting me, for letting me walk out into the night with nothing but a suitcase. But hatred is not so simple. Every time I remember her face when I confronted them, the way her tears fell silently, the way her hands trembled as she covered her mouth, I felt something else. Sorrow, guilt, longing. Because no matter what she had done, she was still my mother, and part of me still loves her. Fiercely, desperately, even though she had failed me, that conflict leaves me apart. Some nights, I will hold my phone in my hand, her number on the screen, my thumb hovering over the call button. I imagine her voice answering, imagine the relief in her sigh. But then I remembered the silence in the kitchen the night my father cast me out, the way she kept her eyes on the floor as if I weren't worth defending. And my thumb would freeze. I would throw the phone across the bed and bury my face in the pillow, screaming into the fabric until my throat ached. The turning point came one rainy afternoon. I was leaving the office when I saw my mother across the street, standing at a bus stop. She looked so small, so fragile in her faded raincoat, clutching a plastic bag with vegetables. The rain was pouring down, drenching her hair, but she didn't even raise her umbrella. Her shoulders were hunched, as if the world itself was pressing down on her. For a moment I froze, my feet rooted to the ground. My heart screams at me to run to her, to take her hand, to tell her I was still her daughter, no matter what had happened. But I couldn't move. My chest tightened, my breathing shallow. The anger, the betrayal, the longing, all of it collided inside me like a storm, leaving me paralyzed. And before I could gather the courage, the bus arrived. She climbed on slowly, her figure disappearing into the crowd. I stood there in the rain long after the bus had gone, trembling, soaked, and empty. That night, I realized something I hadn't admitted to myself before. I wasn't just seeking revenge against my father or my brother. I was punishing my mother too. By staying away, by holding my voice, I was making her feel the loss of me. And that realization shattered me, because unlike them, she hadn't chosen betray. She had chosen silence. And silence is not the same as cruelty. Silence is fear. Still, the wounds between us were too deep to bridge overnight. I couldn't forgive her yet, not fully. But I knew I couldn't keep living in this half-life, torn between hate and longing. Something had to give. It was around that time that I received an invitation from a former university friend to attend a reunion. I almost didn't go. I hated the thought of smiling and pretending everything was fine. But something in me craved connection, craved proof that I wasn't as alone as I felt. That night, surrounded by old friends who laughed and teased like no time had passed, I felt a strange mixture of joy and grief. They speak of their families, of weddings and children, of parents who still called to check if they'd eaten. And I sat there, smiling faintly, sipping my drink, my heart aching with envy. One friend, a woman named Mai, pulled me aside. She had always been sharp, able to read me like an open book. "You still grieve for your family, right?" she asked softly. I nodded, unable to speak. She took my hand, squeezing it. "I don't know everything that happened, but I do know one thing. You can't live your whole life proving them wrong. They may never have changed, but you have. You deserve a life of your own, not one defined by their betrayal." Her words pierced through me. They stayed with me long after the reunion ended, echoing in my mind during sleepless nights. For so long I had defined myself by what I had lost, by the rejection of my father, the silence of my mother, the betrayal of my brother. But what if she was right? What if my life could be more than just a reaction to theirs? And yet, no matter how much I tried to move forward, fate had other plans. It was Sunday morning when the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something in my gut told me to answer. A neighbor's voice greeted me, trembling. "Son, your father. He's in the hospital. He seems to have had a stroke." The world around me blurted. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I didn't know what to feel. Fear, anger, relief. After everything he had done, after all the words that had cut me like knives, Was I supposed to rush to his side? Or was this karma, the universe delivering its final judgment? I went anyway. I don't know why. Maybe out of duty, maybe out of curiosity, maybe out of the faint hope that there were still words left unsaid between us. When I arrived at the hospital, the sight of him lying on the bed hit me like a blow. He looked smaller, weaker, nothing like the towering figure who had once ruled our house with iron fists and fiery words. Tubes and machines surround him, beeping steadily, reminding me that even the strongest men are just flesh and bones in the end. My mother was there, her eyes red from crying. When she saw me, she gasped, reaching for my hand. I'm here. Her voice broke, and for the first time in years she held me tight. I stood stiffly at first, then slowly let myself lean into her embrace. I looked at my father, at the man who had thrown me out, who had told me never to come back. His eyes fluttered open, hazy, unfocused. For a moment they locked on mine. I expected anger, disdain, rejection, but instead, I saw something else. Fear, regret, maybe even shame. And in that moment, all the years of pain swirled inside me. I wanted to scream at him, to demand why I was never enough, why he chose my brother over me, why his love came with conditions. But no words left my lips. Instead, I just stood there, staring at the man who had broken me, and wondered if revenge was still worth it when the enemy lay dying. The hospital room was heavy with silence, broken only by the hum of machines. My mother whispered prayers under her breath. My brother wasn't there. He had vanished again, leaving the wreckage for others to face. Typical. As I stood at that bedside, I realized something profound. Revenge had brought me here, but forgiveness, or at least the attempt of it, might be the only way to walk out whole. But forgiveness is a journey, not a choice you make in one moment. I didn't forgive him that day. I couldn't. But I began to see the path, and that disenchanted me more than hatred ever did, because forgiveness meant letting go. And letting go meant losing the one thing that had fueled me for so long, my anger. The days that followed at the hospital felt surreal. I sat by his bed, watching the man who once seemed invincible now struggling just to breathe. His voice, when it came, was broken, faint, like the shards of a man who had lost the strength to command the world. My mother barely left his side, her devotion as steady as it had been all her life, even though his choices had crushed her over and over again. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to turn my back and leave him there, just as he had once told me to leave and never return. But I couldn't. Something about seeing him so small, so frail, stirred a part of me I thought had died long ago. That's the cruelest part of family. No matter how deep the betrayal runs, some hidden part of your heart still remembers the love, still aches for it, even when you wish it wouldn't. One evening, when the room was quiet and my mother had dozed off in a chair, he stirred. His lips moved, and I leaned in close. His voice was raspy, trembling. My breath caught. That word, simple yet loaded, cracked open every wall I had built around my heart. I'm sorry. I froze. For years I had dreamed of those words, but I had also convinced myself they would never come. My father, the man who never admitted wrong, was apologizing. His eyes brimmed with tears as he tried to lift his hand, but it shook too much. I took it gently, hesitantly, feeling the weight of all the times he had slapped the table, slammed the doors, pointed at me with anger. Now that same hand was fragile, almost weightless. I wanted to scream that it was too late, that sorry didn't erase the night I left with nothing but a suitcase, that sorry didn't erase the years of being silent, the countless sacrifices I made while my brother wasted everything. But the words stuck in my throat, because looking into his eyes, I saw not just the father who had cast me out, but a man facing his mortality, drowning in regret. I whispered, my voice trembling. Dad, do you know how much pain I was in? His eyes closed, and a tear slipped down his cheek. That was his answer. The following days blurted into hospital corridors and whispered prayers. My brother showed up once, drunk, shouting at nurses, demanding money from my mother even there. My father turned his face away, ashamed. For the first time, I saw recognition in his eyes. He finally saw the son he had chosen over me for what he truly was. And maybe that was the greatest justice of all. Not my revenge, not my truth, not my confrontation, but the undeniable revealing itself at last. The end came quietly, in the early hours of the morning. My mother and I were both there when the monitors went still, when his chest no longer rose. She clutched his hand and sobbed, her entire body shaking. I sat frozen, numb. I thought I would feel triumph, relief, some sense of closure. Instead, I felt hollow, because no matter what he had done, he was still my father. And death, even when it comes to someone who has wounded you, carries its own kind of grief. The funeral was small. Neighbors came, whispering condolences. My brother arrived late, sunglasses hiding his bloodshot eyes, leaving early when no one gave him the attention he craved. My mother wept, quietly, dignified even in her devastation. I stood beside her, a strange calm washing over me. The anger that had fueled me for so long was gone, burned away by the finality of death. What remains was sorrow. Sorrow for the man he could have been, for the family we might have had, for the years lost to pride and silence. After it was over, I walked alone to the edge of the cemetery, my shoes sinking into the damp earth. I looked up at the sky, gray and heavy, and whispered into the wind. Dad, I forgive. Not because you deserve it, but because I need to be free. And for the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. Not joy, not peace exactly, but release. The chains I had carried since that night he told me never to come back loosened. The scars remain, yes, but they no longer define me. Life after his death was quieter, but not easier. My mother leaned on me more, and for the first time, I allowed her back into my life, cautiously. We had long conversations late at night, sometimes filled with tears, sometimes with laughter. She confessed things I had never known, that she had wanted to defend me that night, but fear had paralyzed her, fear of losing both me and him. That every day after I left, she kept my room untouched, as if waiting for me to walk back in. That she had hated herself for staying silent, but didn't know how to undo it. I listened. And slowly, I forgot her too. Because forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about reinforcing the wounds and choosing to stop letting them bleed into the future. As for my brother, he continued down his destructive path, chasing debts and illusions. I stopped trying to save him. That was my greatest act of liberation. Walking away from the role they had forced me into, reluctant to carry his sins anymore. His choices were his own, and so were the consequences. Years later, I still remember the night I left with my suitcase, tears blinding my vision as I whispered, I don't want that either. Those words have stayed with me. A reminder that leaving wasn't my choice. It was forced upon me by a father's cruelty. But walking away again, stronger, after confronting the truth, that was my choice. And forgiving him at the end, that was my salvation. Sometimes I think about what my life would have been if things had been different. If my father had valued me as much as he valued the son who betrayed him. If my mother had spoken up sooner. If I had stayed silent that night instead of daring to say no. But then I remember, it is exactly because of the pain, the betrayal, the fire I walked through, that I am who I am today. I am no longer the frightened daughter with trembling hands. I am the woman who survived being cast out, who stood up, who refused to be silenced. And even though my family broke me, they also forgave me. To those who are listening, who carry their own wounds, who have been robbed by the very people meant to protect them, know this. Your pain does not define you. Your survival does. You can choose to let the betrayal consume you, or you can rise from it, carrying your scars as proof of your strength. I chose to rise. And though the journey nearly destroyed me, it also gave me back my voice, my freedom, myself. So when I look back now, I no longer hear only his words, "If you leave this house, don't come back." I hear my own, steady and unbroken. I came back, and I walked away, free. If this story touches you, if you see pieces of yourself in my journey, I ask you to share it with someone who might need the reminder that they are not alone. Leave a comment below. I would love to hear your thoughts, your experiences, your reflections. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, filled with truth, pain, and healing, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Together, maybe we can turn our scars into strength.